The title of the paper today Is Government Dead? The Future of Governance. I will mostly talk at a conceptual and abstract level. Governance without government, beyond government, government is dead. Can society be organized without government, and so forth? And this is not just in newspapers, in popular journalism, but in scholarly and academic work as well. Essentially, many people have written the obituary of government. Government is an impediment in the way of the citizens. Governments obstruct creativity. Government is a millstone around our neck, takes away from human creativity, and essentially government is a waste. Now, in all these statements, once you make these statements, you will find quite attractive, because there is some truth in all these things. But if you explore more deeply, then you are going to see another picture. Primarily, there are three sources from where the dissonance or discontent against government comes. First and foremost is, of course, everybody knows today the government is bloated, has expanded hugely. In many societies, the largest item of expenditure in the national budget is to pay for the government. Largest part of the national debt in many countries is to cover for the interest that is used for paying public officials. Year by year, it has expanded, it has become big, and the word bureaucracy itself has become a dirty word. All of us have experienced that particular phase of bureaucracy. And therefore, the outrage is very widespread. This widespread outrage was further aggravated in the 1980s by what has been popularly described as the Taxpayers Revolt. Because in the years from 1945 onwards, taxes have escalated. And around 1980, people had had enough, and they revolted. Questions were being asked: what is the value created by public service? What do you get for investing or spending in the government? What is the value public service adds? These were questions which were difficult to answer, and it further galvanized people's attitude towards government. In the 1980s, two leaders developed powerful polemic against government on the two sides of the Atlantic. Margaret Thatcher, on one side of the Atlantic, declared that the government that governs least governs best. Therefore, her electoral pledge was she would end the days of big government. And she promised that in her first 5-year term, she would reduce the size of the government by 40%. Across the Atlantic, on the other side, a year later, Ronald Reagan, President Reagan came to power, declaring that the problem of government is the government itself. Do away with the government, and he won the election as an outsider who would go to Washington to end government. And these were very, very powerful rhetoric. You could make a very powerful case, and when you put it with bloated bureaucracy, high cost, the negative perception of bureaucracy, and the inability of governments, all these things add up. And in democracies, when people's trust in governance declines, it becomes very difficult to preserve the integrity and functioning of democratic institutions. So it was just not a polemics, just not attacks, but also there was a gradual diminish in public trust in the governments. The number of people turning to vote has declined, is declining. Reason being, what is the point? You change the government, nothing changes. Young people are not coming forward to serve in the government. Many, many government jobs around the world today remain unfilled. So whichever way one looks at, one sees a lack of confidence. And to those who were concerned with democracy, those who are concerned with the welfare of the society, they began to realize that unless we did something to restore the credibility of the government, the very effectiveness or very survival of our society would be become questionable. Government historically has a very important and impressive record. Whenever a society was confronted with a problem, confronted with a challenge, confronted with a massive issue, citizens and people turned to the government to solve the problem. In the 19th century, in Europe, when people wanted to deal with illiteracy, it was the government they turned to remove mass illiteracy. When the society decided that citizens need health, people turned to the government. At one time, an operational state provided every service. Why? Because market did not or was not capable of providing or did not provide. Invariably, market does not provide a service that is not lucrative or profitable. But in the second half of the 20th century, large areas of services that used to be earlier provided by the government came to be provided by civil society, non-profit organizations, and the market. And therefore, as people began to think about reinventing the government, they noticed that on the ground, the reality had changed. There was no there was no clarity and there can be no clarity as to what the government should do, what the private sector should do, or what the non-profit should do. There is no a priori. Essentially, reinventors of government began to recognize the government's role was where the market failed. However, and it is very important to realize this, that the role of the government did not change. Government continued to be the provider of social justice and responsible for ensuring that the services they needed are available. And that is the big transition in the reinvented government. The government is also is left with three challenges. One is it must ensure access to all citizens, unlike the market. Every citizen must get all the services it needs. Second, of course, is access in itself is not enough. It must be quality. So, ensure access to quality services. Also, all citizens are not alike. One size does not fit all. So, not only government must ensure access, quality access, but now, because one size doesn't fit all, government must ensure choice. Government must ensure quality, access, choice. So, once upon a time, you used power and resource to build hospitals because that's the way you provided health service. Now you use power and taxpayers' money by drawing in all the services and capacities that exist in the society, private, government, non-profit, and use these two powers to ensure that citizens are getting the service. And government's responsibility is only, nobody is discriminated. Access, quality is ensured, whether it is education, whether it is healthcare, whether it is housing, whether it is environment. And making sure that choices are available. So what does this mean? Is government, from being a commander, it no longer commands. It orchestrates. It orchestrates to ensure that whatever is needed, and you use differing composition. So the old rigid bureaucracy no longer works. For every task, you create a new network of capacities to solve the problem. And essentially, all governments are now slowly moving in varying degrees in this particular direction. Everybody is moving. So let me go back to the question, is government dead? I will say, as the French philosopher had said, if God did not exist, human beings would have to invent it. In the same way, if the government dies, human beings will have to reinvent government. Thank you very much.